welcome back to Living Through the Shift podcast, where we say you're not crazy, you're just going through a lot of shift. And I want to give a special thanks to the Russell for letting us host here. The Russell in Nashville, they're absolutely amazing. Check them out. They're awesome. They're in East Nashville. And they have some really great programs that help, the unhoused and homeless population. So I am so excited to be back. This is our first episode after taking a break. I'm really excited because I get to have Eric Miller. So Eric and I met a few months ago because I was considering putting my mom back into assisted living or memory care at that point, and she had already done it. So I'm really excited because I feel like this is a conversation that a lot of people don't have. They're always worried about, we're going to put mom in a home, and just debunking that. And that's really what we're kind of going to talk about today, is just really talking about, navigating that process, but also navigating the guilt, because I think a lot of us feel bad when we have to put our parents in a home. So let me tell you a little bit about Eric. So Eric considers himself blessed to be able to help seniors and their families as they face the complex challenge of finding the right senior living community. He assesses carefully to all his clients' needs, concerns, and preferences before recommending appropriate levels, such as independent living, assisted living, memory care, or in-home care. Eric went through the same daunting experience recently when he helped find care for a family member in Los Angeles. This experience has helped to give him the passion that he has today to help families. And your motto or your quote is, "Families know they can trust me because I genuinely care and treat every family as if I were assisting my own family." You are happily married with one teenage son, having gone through the experience of relocating a loved one in assisted living. You have a heart of compassion to help others navigate the process that's often difficult and stressful. And while you are not working, you enjoy listening to live music, watching hometown Nashville Predator games, and running through the local parks or nature trails. Before this, you had a career in behavioral health, which I didn't know
Correct.
about. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, first, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course.
Such a pleasure to be with you here today. I guess I would refer to it as my prior life, my prior life in behavioral health. I worked with a few behavioral health startup companies here in Tennessee that were launching their services and growing their services to help people with mental health and substance abuse. It's really how I got here.
Okay.
13 years ago, a company that I was working for out west decided that they wanted to move to Tennessee for their operations. And so I came to Tennessee and fell in love with this place, and it's home now.
Okay. So you are considered a certified senior advisor. Can
Yes,
you please tell me what that is?
absolutely. So, Certified Senior Advisor is actually a certification program through the Society of Certified Senior Advisors. It did require a lot of reading. It took me back to my college days, of course. Had to take a 3-hour test that, yeah, I only found out how I did if I failed. Fortunately, I passed. And so the thing that I like to tell people about the Society of Certified Senior Advisors is that it requires an ethics component, and there needs to be ethics in every business. People with honesty and integrity to walk side by side with families in crisis, background check. And there's just a lot of education in understanding what the population is. When it comes to seniors, there's a specific set of needs that folks have that they may not have when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s. And so it was a great education to learn and understand how can I identify what these people's needs are and how can I help them and meet them where they're at.
I know that I was looking at it and said, "Oh wow, this is different." I said, "Oh, I should really be asking Eric more about this," because we went out, we looked, and I know a lot of people have, misconceptions about like placing their loved one in a home, and also it is a business, and I think I've seen a lot of that, like the sketchiness of like senior housing and stuff like that. And you're in the book, so we'll talk about this, but you're in the Age Well Middle
Yes,
Tennessee
age
book.
well.
So, they're
My name
definitely
in lights.
yes, they're definitely amazing and legit, and I think, that's an important part when you talk about ethics, is that this idea that you've been vetted, because a lot of these places have
Right.
not been vetted, and you don't wanna put someone in an inappropriate, placement or whatnot. So, how has work changed or evolved over the years as more families have started navigating caregiving?
That is a great question. One of the things I would say that's really, really important to focus on is the silver tsunami, as we refer to it. The baby boomers are aging rapidly, and our aging population is growing in percentages. If I remember correctly, our very first baby boomer was born in the year 1946. So that puts
Oh my
them at
gosh.
what, 79 today. So that population is extraordinary in what happened in their lifetime. And the thing that is putting a lot of stress on the system right now is that we weren't prepared for this large group to need services and to live longer and live longer with disease. So that's what we're in today. And that's what we're facing is how do you deal with disease for an aging population and a shortage of housing and people who have other ancillary issues like affordability issues, or maybe there's some other limitations because they have health issues. How do you find the right place at the right time, at the right place, or at the right price, and close to family or loved ones?
Yeah, I think when you said the silver tsunami, obviously like my comedian brain is like, is it a new movie with like Denzel Washington and Robert De Niro?
Sharknado.
Exactly. Like, what is that? But it's not. It's like, I guess it's the gray hair idea of,
Right.
people are aging and other things like that and trying to find that place. I think when we put it under the guise of the scene, like the silver tsunami, people are probably thinking to themselves, it helps condense it and they think they don't really know what it is. So they're like, "What's that? Like, is it a new like water thing or something?" But it's really a crisis that a lot of us aren't talking about. So I'm just going to throw out some figures just so some of us kind of know what's going on. So the average cost of a room and board for a public college and private college is about $13,000 and $14,000 respectively, just to kind of give you an idea of what that is. The average mortgage costs between $1,600 and $2,800. Memory care costs an average of $9K, with Hawaii being the most expensive, around at $11,000. So, how much is Nashville, and like what is the Nashville average? Because I just pulled it, so I know you all have more recent numbers. So, what numbers do you have?
So, according to Genworth, in 2024, the average cost in the state of Tennessee for assisted living, which covers assisted living and memory care, is around $5,900 a month. Now, the scary part is that some of our more rural areas where costs may be a little bit lower, um, that includes some of those areas. You know,
Okay.
some of the more
Wow.
metropolitan parts of Tennessee. You look at things like in Nashville, that number is very, very low. It might be more in the $6,000 to $7,000 a month range for somebody to get care as well as housing.
Okay. And then I know some people are wondering, like, what's the difference between assisted living versus memory care versus independent day? Can you kind of explain to people what the differences are in like nursing homes and things like that?
Absolutely, all the time. I get from families, "You're not going to put me in one of those places, right?" And that is the person thinking it's a nursing home that they're going to. And of course, most people, if they have been to a nursing home, especially if they went to one 20, 30 years ago, it hasn't changed much, but it has changed. Nursing homes are where a person would go. They're considered to be a subacute unit. So it is a step below a hospital. So when people think you're not going to put me in a nursing home, when it comes to families making a decision about housing, there's nobody that wants to be in a medical unit, just like we wouldn't want to be in a hospital unless we're sick and need care. The same thing goes for a nursing home. So most people would need a medical issue in order to be appropriate to be in a nursing home. Assisted living and memory care is very different. That was actually born out of the idea that some people were looking for more non medical support, help with their activities of daily living that we oftentimes refer to as feeding, bathing, clothing, the different things that are needed to manage the day-to-day process of a lifestyle, but doesn't really include a medical need. So that's what is front and center in assisted living and memory care. Now, the memory care is lumped into assisted living, but memory care is where somebody would go if there is a lot of confusion, so much so that a person might not even recognize their own living environment.
Right.
If a person is at risk to think, I'm going to go home, and they're walking out of an assisted living, it's probably time for memory care. If somebody needs two or more activities of daily living assistance, even if it's just stand and assist for safety while someone's showering, that's when assisted living becomes appropriate and home may not be safe anymore.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about like memory stuff. So if someone's like, "What do you mean by memory?" So it could be like, you have like a cognitive impairment, or it could be like a dementia, or like some type of Alzheimer or a dementia diagnosis, or Alzheimer's diagnosis. And I guess we can pivot to this idea of safety versus happiness, because the kids are always like, "Well, is she happy?" And I'm like, "I don't care if you're happy. I need you to be safe." So, can we talk about like this safety crisis that I don't think people are talking about?
Absolutely. So there is a balance where safety does include social as well. Um, I think during the COVID pandemic phase, we learned a lot about how isolation can be very, very tough on families, particularly seniors, because we're social people. Even if somebody is not an introvert, the idea that somebody has touch and engagement emotionally, those kinds of things are so, so important. And it's hard to mimic that in the home, especially if you're just with one person, like a spouse or an adult child. It's hard to mimic that social aspect. And when we don't use our brain, we lose some of our capacity as well. So that's where I think the idea that safety is important. It also includes that social aspect, but safety, the primary thing about that I would love for families to take away from this is that if we can't be the eyes and ears for 24 hours a day, we may not be keeping somebody safe just by saying, well, nobody can take care of my husband or my wife or my mother at home like I can. Sometimes it can be very, very exhausting for a caregiver, and that's why these places have popped up to provide dignified care 24 hours a day.
Thank you for explaining that. And then also, I know you mentioned non-medical in-home care as well, because I know that I think you mentioned it was about like $5,900 for 44 hours a week of non-medical, like for 44 hours per like week for the whole month.
Right.
And that's just like non-medical. So that's not giving medication, or like if someone has like diabetes or something like that. And I know that, here, Governor Lee, he's like changed a few things, but I know other places haven't switched over yet.
Right.
Now, I will say that most people come to you in a crisis.
Right.
And like that's where I kind of found myself. We had to find her a place to, and that's how I figured this place out. Not you all, but just we had found
Mhm.
someone. And that made me realize like we really do need to start having these like housing arrangements really sooner. So when should they have these conversations? And also, you kind of like mentioned this appetite for crisis. So can
Right.
you talk about that? Like, when should we be talking about these things?
Today.
Okay.
We should
Okay.
be talking about this today, no
Okay.
matter what.
Yeah.
I think everybody has a slightly different appetite for risk. And the reality is, if if the conversation hasn't happened already and a crisis occurs, then everything is going to be about what can I do immediately and not factor in anybody's wants or needs or desires. And Tiffany, you know that sometimes when people have an accident or they have a health event, they're no longer able to speak for what their wants and needs are.
Sure.
And so having the conversation today is key, because then we understand, what does somebody really desire? What environment do they feel is what they want to be in? What are the measures that somebody wants? I guess, for lack of better words, we call it heroic measures. If somebody goes to the hospital and needs to be on a ventilator, maybe somebody doesn't ever want that. Having the conversation about a ventilator is important, because if mom or grandma says, hey, if I ever get to this place where I need a ventilator or I need a feeding tube, that may be something that they would resist. And if they had the opportunity to say, I do or do not want this, this isn't the kind of life I want if I'm being kept alive only by these, medical measures as opposed to, my body's own ability to stay alive. So having the conversation today allows for knowing what mom or grandma or grandpa's desires are and what their wants and needs are.
Because a lot of people, what I've realized is they make these decisions when they're younger, and then they kind of don't like revisit it every few years throughout like a diagnosis or even before a diagnosis, because you're like, yes, give me all the heroics. And then like you start to get to a certain place and you're like, are you sure that you want that? And I don't think that they know. So if someone says, okay, I'm going to go tour a place, what are some red flags or like what are key things that we should be looking for in these places when we're going to look at them?
Great question. So going and looking at a place, the first thing that I would tell anybody is put yourself in the position of your loved one. What would you want for yourself? And then see it through their lens. So I'm always focused on the things that aren't necessarily going to show up on a Google review. That's kind of what I tell people. Look, you can look on Google, and I'm going to look at the state website and see, are there any violation errors? And then are we going to see those things playing out when we're touring? Is there a medication cart that's left unlocked and unattended? That can be dangerous for somebody who's not clear with sound mind and judgment. They could access a medication cart and just think, well, these are Skittles. They're not pills. There's some candy, and
Yeah.
I'm taking my candy to go see a movie today. We don't want that. So those are some of the warning signs, things of that nature. Looking at the staff, if they're looking at their phone and a person is left unattended, that's a red flag as well. Those are things that I think are important, and then really just the environment itself. Are there doors that are open? In a memory care, that could be catastrophic if a door is left open because somebody can actually leave and think that they're going home. And I've heard somebody say they were going home and the question was asked, well, where are you going? Well, I live in Norway, of course. Well, that's a long way. So again, safety has, many different factors. And sometimes it's just keeping somebody safe against leaving a place that is their home.
Thank you for saying that. So let's pivot back to the Price is Right, because someone's probably thinking to themselves, okay, I don't make that much money. My parents
Mhm.
don't make that much money, or my parents have no savings. They don't have a good pension. I know my mom, she worked for the police department, so she had a nice pension. And
Right.
obviously, we were afraid to, or I was afraid. I was like, God, it's like she's spending all this money on her care, but it's care. But then it became to a point where you start to realize, well, it goes up every month. Like it's like rent. So it goes up every month. That 5% really does add, 5% over 4,000. It starts to add up really quick. So are there any affordable or creative solutions that you've really seen work for people with limited resources?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The cost for care, room and board is overwhelming. Even for somebody who has the financial means, there may be a legacy in mind to fund a person's college education, maybe a family member's, and instead that money may be spent on care. And so there are programs that are out there, but we are very, very behind, particularly here in Tennessee. But nationwide, I just think that we need to do a better job of taking care of our elderly. And and the reason I say we need to do a better job is that there are a lot of people who don't have access, and whether it's money or if they're on a wait list, it doesn't matter. We don't have enough resources for the aging population today. They're growing faster than the buildings are being built to actually care for them. There are state and federal programs. In every state, there is something called an Area Agency on Aging and Disabilities, or, it's a government entity because there's an acronym, the AAAD,
AD.
as it's referred to. Definitely going in and looking at resources there. That's the first place to start. Then there are these programs. Again, here in Tennessee, we have one that is called Choices. Choices is part of a program that is called a Home and Community Based Services, or HCBS waiver, as it would be known anywhere else in the country. And it's just what it says: home services. So that could be caregiving services and support, or community based. So it could be help with financial funding for assisted living or for nursing homes. There are some veteran programs that are out there and exist if a person is a veteran or if a spouse is a surviving spouse of a veteran. But beyond that, a lot of this is self-funded, life insurance, long-term care funded, things of that nature. And when people don't have it, it's an unfortunate circumstance of, okay, what do we do now? And finding what the next best solution is that might be available and affordable.
I know we're in Tennessee, so 10 care is kind of like where people are going for home and community-based services. And I have not been there in a while, so I don't remember, but I know the threshold was like a little bit under 2,000 for a single person
Right.
for HCBS, and then like a little over, not even 3,000 for like a spouse, like if you're married or something like that.
Right.
So, and that's for your gross income. Now, I will say that if people are listening, have you seen anyone do like a Miller Trust? Because I know that it's
Mhm.
like the QIT or a qualified income trust or Miller Trust. Because a lot of people are like, I don't have enough money, I can't do that. And this is the time where people should be saying, okay, if I have a home, I probably need to put that in trust. I need to transfer those
Absolutely.
assets. I need to get this money out of my name real quick, like you're in a movie and the FBI is about to.
Yes.
So, how, like, what are some families, what are some things that they can do now? Like, have you seen people say, okay, let's be strategic about this care
Yes.
and get this money out of our name and like hide it, really, or like transfer, really do the true transfer
Right.
of the assets? Have you seen people do that?
I have. And I think that, again, that gets back to one of the questions you asked is when should we be talking about this? And the answer I gave you was today, because here in Tennessee, when it comes to things like 10 Care and the home and community based services programs, they have what's called a 5-year look back period. So anything that a person has in terms of their assets and their income, that gets factored in, and they have to show 5 years of responsible spending on things that are considered usual and customary. If there are things outside of that, then the only way to actually protect those assets, I guess, for lack of better words, is with a Miller Trust, which is also a irrevocable trust. And it means that you're designating these things to be spent in a particular way, and it falls within the legal guidelines as far as qualifying for things like Medicaid and that HCBS waiver.
I know that we would do resource assessments and people would sell their cars to their kids for
Yep.
like $5, and we're saying you can't do that because you're not
Right.
giving it to them at market rate. And if you do have it
Correct.
at market rate, you can obviously do the spend down or whatnot. But those are just some things that I learned. Now obviously, I don't know if you remember like Paris Hilton where she's like, "That's hot." That was kind of like her tagline. But right now housing is really hot and it's a hot topic. But I realized that housing isn't a partisan issue, it's a people issue.
Correct.
So, and it's impacting like our aging population relatively quickly. What are some things that you would ask legislators right now to say, "Hey, this is what I've seen," and you're not even thinking about this because you're not out here? What would you ask them or tell them to do?
That's an interesting subject, and we could probably do a 5-part series on that alone. But I would say there are some pressing things. There are these programs that they refer to when it comes to Medicaid. There is one that is referred to as expanded Medicaid, where I guess the you close the gap on the people who are just outside of qualifying when you have expanded Medicaid. And I think it also includes some federal funding. So it brings in some additional resources. It allows for more people to qualify for programs that may not decide about housing simply because it's a financial issue. And if there are ways to bring financial support or remove that as one of the barriers, I think that that would be a big question to ask is why is Tennessee not expanding Medicaid? I think we are one of only 8 states that remain. I think 44 of our states have expanded Medicaid. Tennessee is on the short list that has not.
Yeah.
So it does make it difficult. And I would say that would be a question to ask our legislators. Why are we not doing this? Because we have just as many people here that have a housing need, but we have less resources because of that program not being adopted here in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, there's this mass exodus of people moving to the South because the livability, the affordability sometimes, and even just
Right.
the tax break. And I'm from Chicago, so I'm from the North, and I'm kind of like, why have we not done this? Like, none of this makes any sense. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that's a big deal. So a lot of people are putting their parents into homes, and I remember having a conversation with a caregiver, and she said, "I'm gonna haunt my son for the rest of his life if he puts me in a home." And it also made me think that's a really long time to
Right.
haunt someone, but have you prepared him so that you don't even have to haunt him in your death and you can just chill? So obviously, some families they feel like this guilt, like the
Mhm.
mom, they say that when they're younger, when they're in their 40s or 50s, they're like, "Don't put me in a home." But
Right.
but then we have to make that decision. We feel guilty. How do you help families like navigate that emotional guilt?
Yeah, that's always a tough subject because most people from the era of, again, I'll just go back to the baby boomers, and when people think of a place where mom or grandma goes to, that's probably a nursing home. One of the first official assisted living communities that opened in Portland, Oregon, it was in 1981. So this is a relatively new concept. Prior to that, if somebody has a sharp memory for one of those places as a, referred to as a home, they might be thinking of a nursing home, and it may not smell very nice. It may not look very nice. There may not be any natural light. There may not be any programs or resources for people to feel like they're living. The food may look like hospital plates, with cold green beans and, something that is unidentifiable to eat. Those are the reasons that people are saying, don't put me in a home. Those are the thoughts that are top of mind for an individual. And so today, things look very, very different. But in terms of being able to educate people about what the options are, there are places out there that I would say resemble more of a cruise ship on land. There are activities to engage a person, and it's fun to go and win prizes, just like if you're on a cruise. Maybe you win a free t-shirt from the Bahamas if you're cruising in the Bahamas. These assisted living communities, they do things very similarly to motivate and energize the residents there, but there is something behind it, and a lot of it has to do with safety. We have to use our brains in order to keep our brains sharp, just like we need to use our bodies to keep our body healthy. We have to move it or we will lose it.
Mm.
And so that concept is so important. When a community offers those kinds of resources for folks, where they have bingo and they have different kinds of
Special.
brain puzzles and different exercise games, even just a drum circle, there's so much that's going on for an individual to remain healthy, moving their body, staying in rhythm. So much is going on. Those are the things that are really, really important for people to go and see, so that it removes the stigma of, I don't want to go to one of those places that feels like a hospital room.
Yeah, and then for families who are like, "I feel bad," because I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of people who are like, "I feel bad." What is the thought that we need to think to combat that when we make this decision?
Yes. So sometimes it's survivor's guilt. Sometimes it's just the guilt of, I promised my mother or my father I would not put them somewhere. And so there's this feeling of responsibility that we have to keep somebody at home. And sometimes home isn't safe. And an example I would use to answer that is, I've got a family right now that I'm working with, and the bedrooms are all upstairs. And yet they have made this commitment that mom and dad are going out from this house feet first. They're not leaving this house. So the bedrooms are upstairs, the bathrooms are upstairs, and all of the bathrooms are tubs. So mom and dad both have to step over a threshold that's about 18 inches high. There aren't even grab bars put up in this house yet. So helping people and educating them to understand that sometimes we may have made a commitment, but the biggest commitment we have to remember is, are we keeping somebody safe? Are we helping them to live their best life? And what does that environment need to look like? And if the home is not safe, and the biggest thing that people want to avoid is the nursing home, we need to find some intermediary option. And things like assisted living are just that.
That's great. What are some things, because obviously we're in Nashville and we're seeing like this big boom of they keep building like all these apartments and all these
Right.
things. And I think the worst part is their short-term rentals. But what are some things if randomly we got like I don't know, like a developer or something, and they're listening to it. What are some things that they should be adding to these apartments or complexes so that, if millennials have to move their families into
Right.
these places, what should they be really focusing on?
So, speaking to an aging population and being focused on that, obviously a child may be suited to, take a bath in a bathtub, but having a walk-in shower with, little to no threshold to cause a person to trip. I think there's a statistic about where, most accidents occur for older adults. I think 75% of the time it happens to and from the bathroom. So that tells you right there that threshold, whether it's shower, toilet, or anything, once they cross over that threshold to get into the bathroom, that's a danger zone for folks. And the number one cause of death for older adults over 65 is a fall in the home. So again, what are we doing to keep somebody safe? Um, in the home, having showers versus tubs is definitely one of them. Having grab bars. I had a person that told me that their husband went to a bathroom and his wife took her hearing aids out so she couldn't hear him yelling. He tried to get off the toilet and used the toilet paper dispenser as a pseudo grab bar, and it did not have the strength to hold this man's weight. So, a grab bar that is close by, maybe even a higher raised up toilet seat, these are all things that senior communities should be doing and be focused on. But if it's a multi use place where you may have multi generational folks living together, some of those things might make it a little bit more practical for someone to stay safe at home.
And also, I've seen it is like we want luxury too, like all the way through. Like
Yes.
it's like it doesn't have to look ugly. Like, can we
No, it
preface
doesn't.
that? You can have a lovely grab bar that looks very aesthetically like pleasing as well. So yeah,
I recently saw, I think there are companies out there that are doing some flair with their
okay,
grab bars. They're making them
yes,
different colors. They're making
yes.
the hardware, if you will, that attaches to be a little bit less like a industrial piece and more of like an artistic piece. So
How can we balance caregiving and career?
it's tough. I would say that one of the most important things for an adult caregiver to recognize is that caregiver burnout is real. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen family members say, well, I'm going to do this because I told my loved one I was going to do it. And the caregiver actually either passed away first or had a health event and can no longer take care of themselves either. So take care of yourself first. Just like when we're on an airplane and they say, hey, before you put a safety mask on your children or, the passenger next to you, take care of yourself first. That is the most important because in order to be a caregiver, we have to be healthy too if we are in fact the caregiver. That would be the first thing I would advise to people. The other thing is accept help. Sometimes we're too afraid to ask for help because we think that shows a sign of weakness or we're not doing it the way that we told mom or dad that we would do it. But we need help. I refer to help sometimes not as a caregiver. I will tell an older adult, hey, this is your administrative assistant, because that might be a language that would be a little bit more attractive and be more inviting than a caregiver. Look for help in your family, look for help in your neighborhood, look for help in your church. There are a lot of supportive organizations to help support older adults and family caregivers. There are government programs that offer assistance for people who are taking care of a caregiver. There's something here called the Tennessee Respite Coalition that offers caregiver support and even pays family caregivers just to give them a little bit of break. Check out things like the AAAD for sure, because those are ways to, make sure that the caregiver themselves is strong and healthy so that they can take care of mom or dad, whoever, at home.
That's great because I feel like I know people always say they're like, put your oxygen mask first. And I'm like, Cindy, it doesn't just fall from the sky. Like, it doesn't just say, like, Jesus, like, oxygen mask. It doesn't work like that. But also just the idea of sometimes I think I'm going to go home and go to bed. And then, oh, we ended up in the ER.
Right.
Oh, now it's a hospitalization. But you talking about respite is really important because I don't think people know what that is. Can you talk a little bit about respite?
Yes. Respite is so important because again, it speaks to the caregiver. If the caregiver, goes down, who's going to step up? In baseball, we call that the relief pitcher, right? The pitcher, needs relief. The bullpen is usually full of 7, 8, 9 pitchers in a baseball game. But at home, sometimes we don't have a backup. So respite is exactly that. It provides that backup support, that relief support. Sometimes it might be just for us to go to our own doctor's appointment. And that's important because, again, we need to take care of our own health. Sometimes it may be that we need to go get a haircut or go get our nails done. These things are important for us to feel like we are human in our own skin. It may be difficult if we're having to figure out, well, what are we going to do with mom if she wanders off while I'm getting my hair done? So respite is really, really important. There's adult day programs that are out there. There are assisted living communities that offer adult day care. There are nursing homes. There are assisted living communities that offer 24/7 care. About 4 months ago, I helped a family. There was a husband and wife. Husband has dementia. Wife said, I have a bucket list trip I can no longer take my husband on. She wanted to go to Switzerland. And so she had to find 24-hour care for her husband so she can go on this trip because she's aging herself and she was afraid if she didn't do it now, she may never get to go. So yeah, respite is really speaking to the safety of the person who needs care, but also it's making sure that the cup isn't empty for the caregiver as well.
There's a lot of resources. The thing is the wait list. So obviously we
Right.
need to get more funding, but that's why you're here. Hopefully someone hears that. Are there any community like organizations or other services, particularly for young people, or even just is there a mindset? Because I know for me, when I first went, it was like women in their 70s and they were like, I'm married, like I'm taking care of my husband. I was like, I'm trying to find one. And that was hard for me, but also there was a point where I was like, I don't even care. Like, I just don't care. I
Right.
need help. So, how can young people start to feel empowered to say, or if you're not like, okay, obviously I'm not a baby boomer taking care of my parent, but I'm a Gen Xer or something like that. How can we just say, you know what, I need help? Like,
Right.
how can we start to ask for help? Because I think a lot of us are afraid to.
Of course. The stigma is that if we ask for help, then we've already failed. And the reality is that just like anything in life, sometimes we need a coach. Forgive me for using sports references,
No,
but if anybody can identify with it, I always talk about some of the greatest athletes. They didn't get to the top stage without help. Whether it's in the WNBA, the Caitlin Clarks of the world who have great coaching, or it's the pit boss for NASCAR. We all need somebody to help us and keep us on track. So when it comes to accepting help and reaching out for help, it's so important. Our emotional stability is just as much important as our physical stability. There are caregiver support groups all over. There are organizations here in Tennessee, two that are top of mind. There's one called Alzheimer's Tennessee. They have a lot of caregiver support groups all across the state. And sometimes they're led by a social worker. And there are people of all ages from their 20s and 30s all the way up to, senior caregivers themselves, maybe even in their 70s and 80s. What I would urge any caregiver to look at, especially if somebody is a millennial, focus on the similarities and not the differences. And what I mean by that is that caregiving is caregiving no matter what. If you're taking care of your mom and your mentor is taking care of their spouse, they may have valuable information for you. They may even identify with your mother in a way that you can't. Learn and glean from those that have experience and maybe are a little bit further down the road. There's another organization called the Alzheimer's Association, which is a national organization. So for your listeners that may be outside of Tennessee, you can call 24 hours a day and get a master level therapist on the line to answer questions about what sort of pain points are you in, what are your needs, and they can direct you to some local resources as well. If you have an EAP for employee assistance programs at work, they may have things available, whether it's respite or other resources for families. And employers don't want their employees to miss work. And if we have to miss work because, mom needs help, that's a challenge.
Yeah, they thank you for saying that because I feel like we all can't leave our job, but there's just this idea of like I don't think anyone's come and had that conversation with employers to say, "Okay, we get it. Like you can have FMLA, but also how are you going to work? But how are we going to help you?"
Right.
So I agree with that. And then for EAP, yeah, you're right. I realized that I think having EAP, I think they gave us like 7% for Brookdale or something like that. And
Right.
we didn't go with them, but I ended up realizing that someone's like, "Oh, my mom's with Brookdale, like I'll do that." What's the best part and the worst part of your job?
Oh, gosh. The best part every day has a lot to do with my why. My grandmother was somebody that I walked this path and helped her find assisted living several decades ago. And I didn't have me to help in that. And so today I get to live out the values, much like when my family was trying to find the safest option, the closest option, just the best all around option for her to get the care she needed. My grandmother was the matriarch in my family. So when I get to help families today, I think to myself, I hope that I'm making my grandmother proud because she was a dynamite woman. And I knew it because I saw her from when I was a young child, just being an incredible woman, a strong woman, a fierce person when it came to, having a work ethic and taking care of herself. But when she needed help, my family, we had to do things when my grandfather passed away suddenly. So that's the best part of my job is I get to every day help families that are in crisis, and I'm hoping I'm making my grandmother proud. The part that I like the least about my job is that sometimes families, they wait too long. And I would say that is the one thing that we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know when we're going to need help, right? So I usually just try and tell people, look, when we wait, bad things can happen. And unfortunately, sometimes that is the case. And then all I can do is offer support, sometimes grief support when people really wait too long. But I hate to see families struggle and have resources that they just decide I'm going to wait for them, and then wait becomes too late.
I get it. I feel like it was like the fear. Like, I think we moved her in a place, and then afterwards, now we're kind of in this place of like, I wish I thought of like the long term because I think people put their loved one and they're like, okay, cool. And I don't think we look at the numbers.
Right.
And it's like, I hope they live long enough, but also like, don't outlive this money. But also,
Right.
how are we gonna like DIY this? And
Yes.
like, how are some families DIYing it? Because I don't think Tim Gunn, like when he said make it work, like I don't think that's what he meant. So, how are people like DIYing these things in a successful way or not?
Well, it definitely takes a village. We can't do these things alone. Here's what I would say, and this would be again on the, why you don't wait is a mantra to embrace and do something. Um, if one of your listeners right now is thinking, I'm just going to take care of my mom until I can't do it anymore, and whatever that looks like, maybe that person has had it. It probably waited too long. And if you think to yourself, okay, I love this person, I was raised by this person and I can't do it anymore. What makes you think somebody who can go and do caregiver work, which is hard work and very underpaid and undervalued in our society? A person might be able to make more money pouring coffee at Cracker Barrel than doing caregiver support in an assisted living. But if you've waited too long, if your listeners have waited too long to do something, and now it's like, okay, let's find something today, it may be even more challenging. So the idea of doing something today, having the conversation today, I think is also so that you get ahead of a health issue, creating minimal or no opportunities. That's one of the things that I would say here. And what are people doing to do DIY? I really think that, sometimes you've got adult children that take turns. And when it might be appropriate, maybe just making sure that everybody's fresh. Everybody should just pitch in, whether it's the financial support, the caregiver support, the emotional support, finding what resources are available in the community. If families can share those responsibilities, one person doesn't have to have their light burn out too quickly. It can be very tough if there's just one family member and a person needs help 24 hours a day.
I love that because I feel, and I want to say thank you for saying that because I think that with the sports analogy, we are a team and there is no I in team and you can't do it all by
Right.
yourself. And I'll say thank you to you because I know that one, for coming on, but two, I know that you've helped other people and people like you've helped me where I became not a caregiver and I became her kid again. Like I'm her daughter. And I
Right.
think we assume that role of like I'm a caregiver, and it's like I'm going through another identity existential crisis
Right.
where I have that title of like I'm a kid, which I am, but also I'm a kid, I'm a daughter, like I'm a comedian, whatever. And I think if there's anything, if anyone's watching this, I hope that people know that you give people their names back. I really do. I think you allow them to be their child again. Like I just want to be a daughter. I just want to be a son. Like I just want to be their kid again. So thank you for that
Absolutely.
because yeah. Sorry.
That's probably one of the most important things I would tell a caregiver is, if there is that dread of walking through the door of the house because it's going to be laundry day and whatever other responsibilities, you can't possibly think about, looking forward to just sitting down and talking about, you know, your mother's famous cornbread that is sitting in the refrigerator. It becomes a task to get everything done. And when you get your name back and you get your relationship back and share the caregiving responsibilities, it really is freeing because being a caregiver takes away our ability to be a husband, a wife, a daughter, a son. Those things go to the background. So when we get help, we get those things back, which allow us to have meaningful connection with our loved ones.
No, thank you. I love that. Well, I'm about to close. I will say my tip of the day because I realized just through this conversation, that's really the point of this podcast, is that I don't want people to make the same mistakes I did. Like, I think I did the little fear thing too much. I was like, we're just not going to talk about this. I'm going to bed rot and cover my head and not talk about it. But I will say that I kind of already knew that I was going to take care of my mom. So if anyone's listening to this, the question that I think I would have done is I would have had to sit down with her and I would have said, "Hey, I already know that I'm going to take care of you. How are we going to do that?" And just slowly start having those conversations and slowly take, and not just the conversations, because I think we talk too much. I don't think we take action, but like slowly say, like, let's make a plan because how are we going to do that? Because I think we put so much planning into like a kid's birthday party and like, did you bring the cups and the smash cake and the regular cake and the gluten-free cake? And even in relationships, like we have multiple conversations with people. So I think I would have had like multiple conversations with her.
Have the conversation, understand what does somebody truly want. I'll use myself as an example. I even, my wife and I talked about what would we want to have done if one of us went first? Would we want to be buried? Would we want to be cremated? Those simple things we don't talk about. But yes, we're always worried about, is it the red velvet cake or is it the chocolate cake for the birthday? Like these are important things. Let's remember those are, celebrations are important, but giving voice to the person who can no longer communicate what their wants and needs are. If they had control, the only way we get that is to start the conversation before there is a crisis. So I would urge people, talk to one another, put a plan in place, talk to an estate plan attorney. Even if you're not a millionaire, one day you might be. And where does that money go? I mean, you look on the news right now. There's unfortunately, famous people whose families are fighting in court today
Yes.
about what is going to happen with their money because they didn't plan well. So
Mhm.
let's not be those folks where we don't have a clear plan that is written down and communicated with our loved ones. And then there's a couple of important documents. So there's these things that you might hear about called a power of attorney or a POA. The problem with waiting to get a power of attorney is if somebody does not have capacity because of cognitive decline, they cannot sign over their rights with a POA. So get that done while you're healthy, because once we cross over that threshold, the only other option is things like a conservatorship, and that requires going into court, having a judge approve it. So start the conversation today, take back your control, and whoever your loved one is that may need help, make sure that you're living out whatever their wishes are by having the conversation today.
I was like rolling my eyes with the conservatorship because I'm like, yeah, I was her POA and then I became her conservator. And I'm like, it's not like, free Britney. It's like you're
Right.
stuck there and it's expensive. Like, there's no like afterpay for a lawyer. Like, there's
Right.
no like, can I pay you in installments? And you do have to work now. She's
Right.
like, it don't work like that. Thank you for saying that. You might not be this way forever because I think a lot of us, including myself, I never even considered like, I did not accept this 4 years ago, but also just the idea of you might not be like broke forever. Like you could be a millionaire. You could get a really great job. You're not always going to be like this. So like if you expand, which sounds so woo woo, but just like expanding the viewpoint that it might not be like this forever where you are financially. And that also means that the same way goes for caregiving. It's like it's not going to be like this forever. But even before you get here, you could have a really great job. You could leave that job. Like, I know the market is terrible. And then, like, 2 weeks later, everyone's like getting fired. And then my friend's like, oh my God, I just left my job and I got a totally different job. And I'm like, okay, it is not all bad. Like, it's
Right.
not all bad. And you can plan and you can and loop people into your plan as well. And it can I guess, well, my friend Rhonda said, she's like, you can have a really great life. So I'll end it with this. What brings you hope into the work that you do every day? Because this is like really hard work.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you're a therapist, you're like all the things.
So
So
many hats.
so what makes you come like you're very grateful to take care of your grandmother, and you hope you make her proud, but like what makes you keep going every day?
um, so I learned long ago that some of the best rewards in life come in the form of giving to others. So the service component, I think, is big for me, and I get to see that every day with families that I work with, where they share the same beliefs. Sometimes it's misguided. Again, the caregiver that is trying to do more than they should, or the caregiver that didn't plan, but still has their heart in the right place. I am very optimistic that we are in a good place. The younger generations today, um, they somehow, in general, understand that they want to take care of the generation before them. And so I'm extremely optimistic that we're going to be okay when I see families doing that side by side. And that energizes me to, kind of slip into the family photo on the outside and say, I got you. I'll walk this journey with you. So that's what gives me a great deal of hope is I see people that love on their loved ones and are caring and compassionate, and they may just need a little bit of help. And hopefully if I can bring light where there's darkness for folks like that, then I'm going to sleep easy in my own life each and every night.
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for coming on, and thank you for Sarah for introducing us because Sarah introduced us.
Yes.
So yeah, she's been so great, and I think this idea of like sharing and service, it's free. It's free to like, I mean, obviously what you do is not free, but like just this service component, education, knowledge is free. So thank you so much for taking the time, and we have the book. You're in the Age Well book, and then we also have a link on the website. So we'll put your information on there, and if anyone's looking or even just
Yeah.
wants to have conversations, we'll send them over to you because yeah, it's a lot easier when you get stuff done. Like I don't know. I've never been good at puzzles. And it's just this is what it feels like. You're like, oh, it's a crisis. Let's do a puzzle. Like, let's
Right.
just start looking for stuff. And no, we're not doing that. So we're definitely going to send people over to you. So thank you so much. Um,
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
thank you. And we'll see you next time.